Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Google Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski. For those who don't know, we're all about bringing science, adventure, and conservation to classrooms across Ontario, across North America, and hopefully beyond. Very excited for today's Hangout, today's virtual field trip. We are heading down to the Florida Keys to connect for our second Hangout with the Turtle Hospital. So we're being joined by Teresa Ryan today. She has a degree in marine biology. She's been an educator at the Turtle Hospital for 4 years now. And before that, she was a volunteer for 10 years doing sea turtle nesting in Northeast Florida. So I want to tell you a little bit about the hospital before we get started. It opened in 1986, and there's 4 main goals: to rehab injured turtles and get them back into the wild, to educate the public through outreach and visits, to assist research in aiding sea turtles, working with state universities, and also to work towards environmental legislation to help protect sea turtles, keep beaches clean and safe, as well as the waters for sea turtles. So for those who don't know, there's 7 species of sea turtle, and 5 can be found in Florida: the green, the loggerhead, the leatherback, the hawksbill, and the Kemp's Ridley. And the Turtle Hospital has been helping turtles now for several decades. Some are able to go back in the wild, some do become residents. But I think that's enough for me. As you can see in your corner screen, we have Teresa here, who has lots to tell you about the turtles living at the center and a little bit of information about turtles. So, Teresa, great to have you. Looks like a beautiful day in the Keys.
It's a great thing about living in the Keys. It's always beautiful.
All right, and actually, just before we do kick things off, I want to remind the classrooms who are just starting to join in, who are watching live on YouTube, you don't have to be left out of the action. If you send questions onto the event page, just underneath the video screen, I will get those questions. Let us know who you are and where you're from, and we'll get your questions in today. So Teresa, back to you.
Okay, perfect. So the way we're set up, we've got lots and lots of turtles right now. Right now we currently are caring for 53. And so when the turtles first come in and they're still very sick, they have to be isolated. They go up top there in their own individual tanks. So that way, when they are sick, they can't pass that sick on to other turtles. And then once they're feeling better, they're getting ready to be released, or the ones that cannot be released, they hang out in here. It's a 100,000-gallon tidal pool. And so some of the turtles, like right here we've got Sequoia. She's one of our permanent residents, which means that she's now completely healthy. She just can't survive on her own in the wild anymore. She has what we call bubble butt syndrome. And so bubble butt is what happens when they get hit by a boat, and the force of that boat strike causes air to get trapped underneath their shell. And so floating in a sea turtle is not good, because in the wild, the only time they're ever up at the surface is to breathe. But they eat at the bottom, they sleep at the bottom, they do everything at the bottom. So when they are stuck up at the top, they really are stuck. And so you can't release a floating sea turtle. So that means that they get to stay here. And to make them more comfortable here, we attach lead weight to the outside of their shell. So at least here they can go down to the bottom and go to sleep. But eventually those weights will fall off, so then they're back to floating again. And so most of our permanent residents are permanent because of bubble butt. George, right behind her, she's got bubble butt too. And then some of the other ones, like Chica and KJ, these guys are just getting ready to be released. So this kind of gives them a chance to hang out in a little bit more bigger, more natural of a tank. Get them a little bit more used to the wild. And so these guys, these are green sea turtles. Oop, there's Charlie. Charlie's a loggerhead. But the green sea turtles get their name not because they're actually green, because they're not green, they're brown, but because they're vegetarian. They're herbivores. So in the wild, they eat lots of seagrass and algae. And then here, they get romaine lettuce, kale, green peppers, green stuff. And they eat so much green stuff that they're fat. Their insides turn green. So it's kind of like you are what you eat. Just be glad it does not work that way for us. So the green sea turtles are the most common species that we get down here, or at least here at the hospital. So we've got lots and lots of green sea turtles. And then the loggerheads, Charlie's hanging out down there at the bottom. Charlie is a loggerhead. And so the loggerheads get their name because they have a very, very large head. In the old days, when the ships used to come through the shipping channels, they'd have a spotter on the bow. They'd see these turtles come up for air, and they'd say, "Log ahead," because it looked like a log bobbing up to the surface. And the name just kind of stuck. But Charlie's one of our permanent residents because he was hit by a boat. He's got bubble butt. And sea turtles in the wild are solitary. So in the wild, they don't travel in groups. It's one thing that the movie Finding Nemo got wrong. So if you ever do see one in the ocean, you're just going to find one here, one there. They're not going to travel with their parents. Not going to go traveling the currents together. And so even when you do stick them together like these guys, they don't care. So they'll steal food from each other. They'll knock into each other. They're not being mean. They just ignore each other. But that's okay. The loggerheads, though, you have to be a little bit more careful with because the green sea turtles are vegetarian, so there's no competition for food. But the loggerheads are carnivores, so they eat crabs, lobsters, conch, and with there only being a limited supply of crab and lobster, they will occasionally get a little bit feistier. And so you can put loggerheads and greens together, but you can't always put two loggerheads. Ooh, and then our Kemp's Ridley just popped up, because the Kemp's Ridleys are critically endangered. So that means that they're very, very rare. So we only have one. Her name is Bender. She's currently hanging out down there at the bottom. Come back up, Bender. But the Kemp's Ridleys are known as the ghost turtles because they're very light in color. They look almost like a ghost, especially when they're coming up for a breath of air. But I think she might be disappearing again. Well, at least we got a glance of her. She doesn't typically stay up for very long. And so I was saying that most of our permanent residents have that bubble butt syndrome, because it's one of the few things we cannot fix. But we've got two that do not. One of them is Montel here. So he's had basically everything other than bubble butt. He's been hit by a boat, bit by a shark, entangled in fishing line, and he's had tumors. So he's missing half of his right front flipper, all of his left front flipper, his right eye, and his shell is dented there on the left side. So when a turtle is just missing one flipper, they can still be released. They can adapt, just like a three-legged dog. They're going to look a little bit weird, but that's okay. But because Montel is missing 1.5 flippers and an eye, he's just not very fast anymore. But that's okay. In here, he doesn't have to be very fast. He doesn't have to worry about boats or sharks or anything like that. And then the original bubble butt, that's him popping up right out there in the middle. He's our longest resident. He's the one that's been here since 1989. And it's named Bubble Butt Syndrome after him, because he was the first turtle that we saw that had it. Okay, so let's see some of our other turtles. So, most of the permanent residents hang out in here in the big pool. We do have our little shallow ends here of our big pool for the turtles that are not quite yet ready to go into the big pool. Currently, they're empty. And then the patients are in their own individual tanks. So we'll start off with Thurston. He's a pretty awesome turtle. He's a little green sea turtle. And Thurston is actually a girl. Sometimes when they get named, you don't know if they're a boy or a girl yet. So they get named, and then we realize, oh, well, Thurston's a girl. Because when they're younger, the only way to tell would be to look inside, see what parts they have. Because from the outside, they look identical. Once they get to reach adulthood, which is about 25, 30 years old, then if they're a boy, they get a long tail. Gets to be up to about 13 inches in length. Whereas if they're a girl, the tail stays really, really short, doesn't really go past the end of their shell. But Thurston came in because he had tumors. It's like I was saying Montel had, but that's what he looked like when he first came in. So he had all sorts of tumors all over his face, his eyes, his neck, his flippers. And it's a virus that the green sea turtles get. It's caused by water pollution. It's called fibropapilloma, FP for short. It affects green sea turtles throughout the entire world. We know it is linked to water pollution. We haven't figured out the exact cause yet. It's something that we're currently working on. But the problem is that the tumors grow on their eyes, around their flippers. It makes it very, very hard for the turtle to see or to move, which means they can't eat. Gets them very, very weak, very sick. And eventually, they will kill the turtle. And so the turtles have to come here, we do surgery, remove those tumors, and then once they're tumor-free for a full year, once they've built up the antibodies, built up an immunity, then they can be released. And so Thurston is just about tumor-free. He needs one more surgery, and then he'll be tumor-free. And then sometimes, like this is a little walrus. It doesn't look much like a walrus, but it's typically the people that find our turtles that get to name them. He's hanging out in his little toy. Sea turtles in the wild are used to having rocks and ledges and reefs, things that they can hide under and sleep under, rub their shells up against. Here, we can't give them a coral reef in their tank, so they get PVC pipe instead, because they do have nerve endings throughout their shell, so they can feel things on their shell. So think of like somebody rubbing your fingernail. It doesn't really hurt, but it feels kind of cool. Same thing for the turtles. You waking up there, walrus? Starting to move around a little bit. But when they're sleeping, they can hold their breath up to about 5 hours. So sometimes they can stay down at the bottom for a long time if they want to. Which I think he wants to at the moment. But walrus also came in with tumors. He's just about tumor-free. He's a pretty awesome turtle. But it's typically the people that find our turtles that get to name them. So we get some turtles with some pretty awesome names. One of my favorites is over here. Her name is Coral Bacon. She was found by a family. The little girl wanted to name her Coral. The little boy wanted to name her Bacon. So she became Coral Bacon, which is a pretty awesome name for a sea turtle. You won't ever find another sea turtle named Coral Bacon. But she also came in with tumors. That's pretty much what all of these little turtles are. Currently cleaning the tanks like we do every morning. But we also have a Leonardo. We also have a Donatello. We don't yet have a Michelangelo or Raphael. So we don't have the full Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but we're halfway there. And sometimes the turtles come in like Montel. They come in with multiple problems. So like this is Yoshi. He came in with some small tumors, which the tumors weren't the main reason why he came in. The main reason why he came in is because he was hit on the top of his head by a boat. So it was more of like a glancing blow. So it just kind of scraped the very top of his head. He now has a scar on the top of his head. So it's almost completely healed. And he was also bit by something. He's got a little notch taken out of the very back end of his shell. So something bit him, because their shells, they are bone, so they do heal, but they never regenerate. So it'll never look perfect again. He'll always just have a little notch taken out of the back end of his shell. But that's okay. He doesn't care. But he's just recently tumor-free. We had to wait for the boat strike on the top of his head to heal a little bit before we were able to start surgery. But now his head is almost completely healed. When sea turtles, when they get hit on the head badly, like for people, you get a concussion. It's sort of similar for the turtles. So when sea turtles get hit hard enough, they'll just swim around in tight little circles. It's their version of not being able to walk in a straight line because they're dizzy. But at this point, Yoshi can swim in a straight line. He still sometimes keeps his head cocked to the side a little bit. So inside's not completely healed, but that's okay. He's doing much, much better. And the only thing that's really going to fix that is time. And so he has to stay for a full year anyways, tumor-free. So by the time that's over, he won't have any lingering problems from his head. So far he's doing awesome. Okay, do you want to do a few questions?
Absolutely. Let's grab a question from each class. So I'll take a moment to introduce our classes, and then we'll steal a question from each of those rooms. I do also want to remind the classrooms who are viewing, there's about 10 or so classrooms viewing live via YouTube. If you head over to the event page under Google+, so head into the event page, you can type your questions right in there, let us know who you are, where you are, and we'll get to some of those questions too. So we have, let's see, Mrs. Bray's second grade class from Flatwoods Elementary in Jonesville, Virginia. We've got grades, some students from grades 5 through 8 at Dorian Public School. We've got Mr. Van Hatten and Mrs. Andrea Chee's class from St. Martin's School in Thunder Bay. Mrs. Searson's 3-4s in Douglas. And we have Mrs. Hopkins and Mrs. Webb's grade 2s in Mitchell. So a nice group of classrooms from different spots in North America. Why don't we jump to Thunder Bay? Mr. Van Hatten, your microphone's on.
If turtles were not a part of the ecosystem, how would the ecosystem change?
So how would the ecosystems change if sea turtles were no longer a part of it?
Yes.
Basically?
Yes.
Okay. Well, they are important. They help maintain the seagrass beds, because they're, at least the green sea turtles do, because they are the herbivores. The loggerheads help keep the crab and lobster populations in check. And they also eat jellyfish, which you may not think would be a big deal, but if there's not enough sea turtles to eat the jellyfish, jellyfish eat juvenile fish. They eat the baby fish. So in some areas of the world, there's not enough sea turtles, so then the jellyfish population is getting out of control, which is affecting the fishing population because there's not enough adult fish because they're getting eaten by the jellyfish when they're babies. So then that affects people, because people want to catch all of these fish to eat, and there's not enough of them. Because the ocean is pretty awesome. Everything is connected. And sometimes you don't always realize how it's connected until you take one of those little pieces out.
All right, excellent point and a really good question. Jumping to our grade 2s in Mitchell. Do you guys have a question to get us started?
Don't have a question? Gordon? One up?
Have you ever had any red-eared sliders?
Not down here. The red-eared sliders are a freshwater turtle, just like we don't get snapping turtles. Because the Keys, we're a string of islands, so we have lots and lots of ocean, so lots and lots of sea turtles, but no freshwater. There's no ponds or rivers or lakes in the Keys. So, unfortunately, we don't get the freshwater turtles.
All right, I can see why that question would be asked, because I had a red-eared slider growing up, and
yeah,
fun to have, really affectionate pet. Mr. Bennet, your microphone is on.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So we were wondering, through the presentation, it said that water pollution and boats seem to be the main enemies. Are there any other threats?
Yes. We do get, mostly it's people related, because we will occasionally get shark bites, but primarily it's the boats, the water pollution. We get turtles entangled in fishing line, or crab traps, lobster traps, fishing nets, or they eat fish hooks, or they just eat trash, which one of the turtles I'll show you in a few minutes, he got constipated because he ate trash. And so there's a lot of stuff that we do to the ocean that the turtles can't adjust to.
All right, another good question. Mrs. Searson, I've turned your microphone volume up if you guys have a question.
Hello, we were wondering if the, what was that? They were wondering about the food that these turtles eat, and whether, oh, I know what it was. They were wondering, we were asking questions the other day. When they are released back into the wild, do they ever have trouble readapting to the wild?
Nope. Sea turtles are awesome. One, they're reptiles, and so reptiles don't have the same problems that mammals do. especially for sea turtles, because these guys, they are solitary. Once that mama turtle comes up and lays her eggs, that's it. She's done. She never sees those babies. And so all of their knowledge is instinctive. They're born knowing everything they ever need to know. And so we can raise them in captivity and still release them because they already know it all. They're born with that knowledge. And their brains are very, very small. Like an adult sea turtle's brain's about the size of your thumb or a little bit smaller. Because why do they need a big brain? They already know everything. And so their brains are not made to learn. So it's very, very hard to teach a sea turtle. And so that way when they are here, it's not like you can train them to do tricks like a dog or a cat. So the only real way that you can train them is to train them to come for food. And we have a blind turtle that we've trained to come for food. But like the patients, these guys are around people all day long, but not every single person that's around them has food, so they don't make the connection.
All right. So we visited each class, and I just noticed on the event page we have a couple questions have come in from teachers watching. So first one, we'll do two, and then we'll continue seeing some more turtles. So the first one is from Mrs. Harris's kindergarten class in Austin, Texas, and they're wondering if there's a really big scratch on their shell, does that scratch ever go away?
Well, it does heal, it just never regenerates. So, big guy here. The turtle is Rebel, and then that's one of our rehabbers, that's Alistair. And so, sea turtles in the ocean, they get algae growing on their shell, just because anything lives in the ocean gets algae. So in the wild, they've got a little cleaning station that'll help clean the algae off the fish and shrimp that'll clean the algae off their shell. Here, we have to use a scrub brush. But like Rebel, he was hit by a boat. And right there where he's scrubbing right now, that's his scar. Because their shell is bone. So it heals, it just never regenerates. They always develop a scar. And depending on how the boat strike hits them, depends on how it heals, how large of a scar. Which it doesn't hurt. Like Rebel's scrubbing it, or Alistair scrubbing it, it doesn't hurt. It just looks a bit odd.
Looks like a nice day at the Sea Turtle Spa.
Yeah, especially when you're 230 pounds.
All right, and the final question that came from online before maybe we look at some more turtles is, this is from Mrs. Maxwell, will the tumors come back after the work at the hospital?
Well, it's one reason why we do keep them for that full year, especially those first few months. There is a pretty high chance of regrowth, and so that's one reason why we keep them here. So that way, especially those first couple months, that we can keep an eye on them. So that way, if they do need surgery again, that turtle is very, very small. We can just remove it, and then they start their year completely over. So sometimes these turtles end up being here more like a year and a half, rather than just that full year.
All right. Well, great questions from our classrooms and great questions coming in online. Keep the questions coming in online on the event page. And maybe after Teresa shows us a few more turtles, we'll have another final round of questions from our classes on screen.
Okay. So let's do some other turtles. I'll show you some babies, which right now it is nesting season. Nesting season is at least in the Keys, like May to October. We get primarily loggerheads nesting. And so it takes them about 50 to 60 days for them to hatch. So they haven't started hatching yet this year. So I don't have any babies. We've got two guys from last year, though. And when they're first born, they're tiny. They're only about 2 to 3 inches long. But for now, we've got Copper and Bowser. These guys are about 10-month-old loggerheads. So they're just about 1.5 pounds. So getting big. Because every year we get the babies here when they don't quite make it to the ocean by themselves. So either they get stuck at the bottom of their nest or they get disoriented by lighting. And so they walk towards land instead of towards the water. Because when these guys hatch out, they do that in the middle of the night, and they're on their own. And so their instincts tell them to go towards the brightest light, which should be the ocean. It should be the moon reflecting off of the water. And so when there's another light, like a street light, a house, a car, something else, then that becomes the brightest light, and they get distracted. They think that's the ocean, so they walk the wrong way. And so then they end up in somebody's yard or trying to cross the road or somebody's swimming pool. And so when that happens, they're not sick, they're just weak. And so then they get to come here. We keep them for typically about a month, let them build their strength back up, and then we take them offshore and we release them. But we do try to keep sometimes one or occasionally two. Last year it was Bowser and Copper, and we'll keep these guys for a few years, typically about 2 to 3 years, to kind of give them a chance to get a little bit bigger, a lot healthier, a lot stronger, so that way they'll have a much better chance of survival because they'll be quite a bit bigger. Not as many things will want to eat them. Kind of gives them just like a head start on life. Because when they're babies, they're easy prey. So we'll get to watch these little baby loggerheads grow up. Which if they were in the wild, they'd be offshore in the middle of the Gulf Stream in the floating sargassum seaweed. And so we don't typically see the baby loggerheads very often because they are so far outshore. But the babies do a couple things a little bit different. One, they're a slightly different color. When these guys grow up, they'll look like Charlie or like Rebel. But at this age, they're offshore in that seaweed, so that's that reddish-brownish color. So they're this reddish-brownish color. And sea turtles, they cannot pull their heads and their flippers inside their shell, like a box turtle can. So their heads and their flippers are always out. So when these guys want to sleep, they can't go find a rock to hide under because they're floating. So they'll just tuck their front flippers on top of their back. They'll tuck their rear flippers underneath. So floating in the middle of seaweed, they just look like another blob of seaweed. They don't look like a sea turtle. So they're less likely to get eaten by a shark that way. And then the third thing that they kind of do, which, come here, Bowser. So this is Bowser. It's a pretty awesome little turtle. But they're also kind of spiky. They've got spikes down their back and also along the very top of their back as well. And that's protection. Because when they're little, one bite, little Bowser's gone. And so by being spiky, it makes it less likely for a shark or a fish to want to bite them. It'd be like you trying to bite into a pineapple. You don't need to do it to know that it'll hurt. And then as they get bigger, as they grow up, then their size becomes a deterrent. They basically become too big to eat, so then those spikes will disappear. Because Charlie and Rebel, they didn't have spikes, because they didn't need them. Which would be pretty awesome if Rebel did have spikes. He'd be pretty big. He'd look really, really scary then. And by the time these guys get released, they'll be between 20 to 25 pounds. So they'll have a nice big chance. And they grow faster in captivity than they do in the wild because here they are completely healthy. They're getting enough food, the right kind of food, so that way they don't have any problems. So in like the 2 to 3 years that it'll take them here, it might take them closer to like 4 years, 4.5 years in the wild. Bowser's almost tucking his flippers. He sort of got them tucked. Not quite, but close. Okay, and then as the summer progresses and the little hatchlings and the nests start to hatch, we'll start getting the little itty-bitty babies, and then the rest of our little hatchling tanks will end up being filled up. But at the moment, Bowser and Copper here are our smallest. But that's okay. Eventually, they'll get even bigger. They won't always end up that small. Okay, let's go see some of our other patients. Because so far we've seen lots and lots of green sea turtles, and then just a few of the loggerheads. Because the loggerheads you can't put with the other loggerheads. That's why Rebel has to be by himself. And great thing about us is that we are located right here on the ocean. It's a great thing about living in the Keys. And it's how we get our turtles, is we rely on the boaters and the fishermen, the people that are out there on the water, to keep an eye out. So that way when they see a turtle that doesn't look quite right, they call us. One of our rehabbers is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So doesn't matter when or anywhere throughout the Keys, you call us, we have an ambulance, we go pick the turtle up. Then the rest of our patients are in here. And so one of our newer turtles, her name is Emerald. She's a green sea turtle. She's about 70 pounds. She's been here almost 3 weeks now. And so she was found floating. And for sea turtles, it doesn't matter how or why they're sick. If they are sick, they float. And so she's got an older boat strike, so her shell kind of has a little hump on it, which that's completely healed. There's nothing more we can do to her shell to help it heal any further. But because she was floating for such a long time, she's just very, very weak, very, very skinny. She probably hasn't been able to eat probably a month because she was floating. She was up at the top, the seagrass and the algae was down at the bottom. And so our first kind of goal for her is just to get her stronger. And so have her gain some weight, give her the vitamins, the medications to get her nice and strong and healthy again. And then we don't know exactly why she's floating. With the shell damage like that, odds are good that she has bubble butt, but she hasn't been here long enough to really make that final determination. But by the time that she is stronger and healthier and she has gained weight, then if she's still floating, okay, then we can say that yes, that's because of the boat strike, that's because of bubble butt. Then she'll need to stay. She can be that permanent resident. But at this point, it's still a little bit early to tell. So we'll just have to wait and see. But at this point, we're just keeping her in shallow water, so that way, if all she wants to do is sleep, that's all she has to do. Then, let's see. This one, this is Ellie. She is our only Hawksbill sea turtle, which the Hawksbills are also critically endangered, so they are pretty rare. So Hawksbills get their name because they have a very sharp bird-like beak, looks like a hawk's bill. But these guys have a very, very pretty tortoiseshell pattern on their shell. It's why they're critically endangered. Because prior to the 1970s, prior to the Endangered Species Act, prior to them being protected, anything with that tortoiseshell pattern, like jewelry cases, glasses, that was all made out of sea turtle shell. But now, because they are protected, now that's illegal. So now that stuff is made out of plastic. But their populations are starting to come back. It's just going to take them a long time to get their populations back up to where they're supposed to be. But Ellie's here. She was hit by a boat. She's a very lucky turtle because she's tiny. She's only about 10 pounds. That boat just didn't kill her, first of all. And so, tiny turtle, big boat, typically the tiny turtle loses. But she's doing very, very well. She is still floating slightly, which we don't know if that's because her shell is still healing or if it's a mild case of bubble butt. We're going to have to wait and see. At this point, we're just not sure yet. We would hate to keep her because it would be a very, very long time. Their average lifespan is about 70 to 100 years. So being such a small turtle, she's only a few years old. So we're hoping that it goes away and then we can release her. But we're not going to release her if she can't survive on her own. But hawksbills like to live on coral reefs because they eat sponges, small crabs, other crustaceans. So we can't give her a reef. And instead of a little triangle like walrus, she's used to a lot more structure, so she gets an actual cube. And she's really, really good at hiding underneath that cube. But so far, she's doing very, very good. And then we'll do Bubbles. Bubbles is one of our larger turtles. It's about a 130-pound loggerhead. So, got the nice big head. There it is. And Bubbles is the one that I mentioned that was constipated because she ate trash. And so what happens is they'll eat the crab or the lobster, or they'll eat pretty much anything that's out there floating in the water, even things like trash and plastic, and it'll get stuck in their intestines. It'll block them up so that way they can't poop and they get gassy, which causes them to float. And so sometimes it's partly natural because these guys do eat the crabs, the lobsters, the conch, the stuff with a hard shell. And so if they eat too much of the shell and not enough of the meat, that'll get stuck. But it's typically plastic and other things as well. It's kind of a combination of the two. And something that a lot of people don't always think about are balloons. Because when you let a balloon go into the air, it has to come down eventually. A lot of the times it does that over the ocean. And think about it. What does a balloon or a plastic bag look like floating in the water? Looks like food. Looks like jellyfish. These turtles eat it thinking that it's food. Then it makes them sick. And so when Bubbles first came in, he was floating sideways because that blockage was on his one side. He could not get underneath the water. But at this point, it's been almost 2.5 months. They've been giving him medications to help him poop, get rid of that gas. So he's now finally able to sleep at the bottom. It's just happened in the past few days. So we just took him off of the medications, and he has to stay off medication for about 2 weeks. So that way we can guarantee that he really is completely healthy, that it's not just the meds masking his symptoms. And as long as he continues to do well, in about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, he'll be able to be released. So, not too much longer. Okay, and then let's do some more questions.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing the turtles with us, and it's very exciting. We got to see 4 species today. I think last time we saw 3, so adding one more, that was very cool.
Yeah.
So I jumped right over our class in Virginia, our grade 2. So I'm going to turn their mic on. They can have 2 questions to kick things off.
Okay. Who's first?
Where do you
Stand up here, sir. Say it loud.
Where do you find these sick turtles?
Well, when sea turtles get sick, they float. So they're not like dolphins where they'll strand themselves on the beach, where it makes it really, really easy for people to find them. Sea turtles are just floating. And so we teach all the boaters and the fishermen throughout the Keys to keep an eye out. So that way when they do see a turtle that's floating and it's barely moving, that means that something's wrong. And so that's when they need to call us. And most of our turtles come from throughout the Keys, because there's other turtle hospitals, turtle facilities throughout the state of Florida. And so anywhere else throughout the state, one of those other facilities is a little bit closer.
You see yourself? There you go. That's good.
Why did you start the turtle hospital?
Loud.
Why did you start the turtle hospital?
Well, the Turtle Hospital opened its doors in 1986. So this is actually our 30th anniversary.
Very cool. We're excited to be a part of it, I guess, having these few hangouts. We're getting to hang out the 30th year of the Turtle Hospital. Doing really awesome work. Back to Thunder Bay.
Yay!
We have another question for Teresa and the Sea Turtles.
We do. It's Michaela.
Can turtles attach to people and really like a certain person? If so, do you have a special form of turtle?
Sea turtles don't really attach to a specific person. Think about like having like a lizard or a snake as a pet. They really only care about you because you feed them. But they can't always distinguish one person from another person. Which we have favorites, because we get attached to them, but they don't always get attached to us. So like even like the turtles that come in with those tumors and they're here for a full year, sometimes longer, when we release them, they hit that water and then they are gone, which is good. It's what we want them to do, but they don't hang out. They don't care, which is a good thing in that respect.
Okay. Grade 2 is in Mitchell. Your microphone's on for another question.
What is the sea turtle life cycle?
Well, their life cycle is sort of similar, I guess, to ours in that there's different ages. So when they're first born, those are the hatchlings, and then they become post-hatchlings after like 2 weeks, and then they're that way until juveniles. So like Bowser and Copper, they're large enough now that they're technically juveniles. So just like Ellie is a juvenile, our little Hawksbill. And so for sea turtles, we don't go based really so much off of age, because you can't always tell how old they are. We go based off of size. And the different species have different sizes at which point they become subadults and adults. Because like the Hawksbills, like Ellie, she only will get to be about 150 pounds, full grown. And so she'll only ever get to be a little bit bigger than Bubbles. So whereas Bubbles, he's 130 pounds, he'd be kind of on that cusp between like subadult and adult right now. But if Ellie was an adult, she'd be an almost old adult.
All right. Dorian Public School. Mr. Bennet, your microphone's on.
How do I do it?
It's on. Just talk. It's on.
How many turtles died in captivity?
Well, every year we typically average about 100 turtles that come in, and we're typically able to release about 70% of them. And so we really like to focus on that number because it's a much happier number. But the rest of those turtles are ones that either die because we are at the hospital. Sometimes there's only so much you can do. They come in so severely injured that you can't help them. Or the other, every year we sometimes get a few new permanent residents. So that would be like the other 30%. But in the 30 years that we've been here, we've released over 1,600 turtles.
Awesome. Mrs. Searson's class, the camera's gone down, but can you still hear us? Oh, maybe not. That's okay. We have a question from the website that's just come in. So this is from a 4th grade class in Round Rock, Texas, from Fern Bluff Elementary. And they're wondering about plastic bags. Do you have many that suffer from plastic bags, and what does that do to a turtle?
Well, plastic bags floating in the ocean look like jellyfish. So it looks like food, so these turtles end up trying to eat it, which ends up like Bubbles. It ends up making them sick because it gets stuck in their intestines and they get constipated. So a lot of the problems with like the trash or the plastic, they either eat it or they get entangled in it. Neither of which is a good thing.
Definitely not. So maybe just before we wrap up, we've talked about a little bit about the 4 species. So can you tell us a little bit about my favorite, the 5th species, the leatherback?
Yes. Well, the leatherbacks are the largest species of sea turtles. They get to be up to about 2,000 pounds. They are massive. They are huge, which is why it's kind of a good thing that we don't get them, because it's hard taking care of something that large. But because they are so big, they like to live way out in the middle of the ocean. They like the much deeper water, so they're not near shore very often. The only time they're ever near shore is to nest, but they don't nest in the Keys because it's too shallow. Our beaches aren't very large, so they will nest in the mainland of Florida, just not in the Keys. And in the 30 years that we've been here, we've only gotten 1 leatherback. And he was a small leatherback. He was probably only about 600 pounds, which is still huge, but small. But the leatherbacks are the ones that primarily like to eat jellyfish, which is another reason why they like to hang out in the middle of the ocean, because that's where the jellyfish has a tendency to congregate.
600 pounds is small. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much for another great hangout. It's always, I mean, our first one was a little colder here. Now we're pretty warm. We're having a nice, hot, humid day, but it's always a nice treat to visit the Keys and visit such cool species like the sea turtles. For those teachers who are watching along, on June 8th, if you want to continue your ocean adventures, we have a full day of hangouts from ocean scientists, explorers, and institutions from all over the world, so 12 hours long on June the 8th. Head over to the website and check that out. And a new newsletter just went out today with some new camera spots for some new hangouts. Teresa and the Turtles will be joining us again on June the 8th for a hangout. I believe it's 1:30 Eastern in the afternoon. But until then, again, Teresa, another awesome hangout. Thanks so much for bringing sea turtles into our classrooms across North America today.
You're welcome. It's why we're here. We like being able to teach people about turtles.
All right, and the very last thing just to mention is your class can help out. You can adopt sea turtles. Just following on the information from the email this morning. Teresa, can you just remind them how they can do that?
Okay. Well, you can do it through our online store, just turtlehospitalstore.com, and you get to adopt, in name only, you don't actually get to take the turtle home, one of our 5 permanent residents. So one of the turtles that will always stay here. And so when you first adopt, you get a certificate with your name and the turtle's name, a little info sheet all about that turtle and why they come in, a thank you letter, and then a magnet to go on your fridge. And then every 4 months, the turtle writes you a letter and lets you know what's going on here. So it kind of allows you to stay updated throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, you get the option to renew or to pick a new turtle, kind of whatever you want to do. And it's only $35 for the year.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, classrooms, maybe think about doing that together, or you might even want to ask your mom and dad to do that at home and adopt a sea turtle and keep up to date. Teresa, thank you so much. I'm going to turn the microphones on so that students can wave goodbye and say thank you. And we'll sign off for today. All right.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. And hopefully we'll see you on June the 8th when we celebrate our oceans. Thanks, everyone.